Hi, in this demo, I'll show the basics of exporting data from Hypergene portfolios to Microsoft Fabric and displaying it in a Power BI report. Our setup looks like this. I have a SQL database in Fabric and a Power BI report built on top of that. Hypergene Flow will be used as the data integration tool to move data from Hypergene portfolios to the SQL database that Power BI will read from. I'll first run the flow manually, and then add a scheduled trigger to automate the process at the end. I've prepared a report in Power BI which is currently empty, but will contain data once the flow has run. I can now switch over to the browser to start building the flow I've created from the File New menu. I'll begin by adding the Get Report Data action for portfolios, which connects to the Report Data API and retrieves the data. I already have a connection configured, so Flow automatically picks it when the action is added. The connection has the portfolio ID, username, and password. Next, I pick the portfolio, report, and format of the data I want to fetch. This API only has the JSON option enabled, so it's the only one I can choose. Let's quickly run the flow and inspect the data returned from the portfolio's API. As you can see, we got a JSON response as expected, containing the data from the finance report. We now want to convert the JSON into rows and columns so it can be inserted into a database table. The tool for this is the Get JSON Data Reader action, which reads JSON as a stream or rows and columns. The action takes the JSON response from the API as input. In this case, I also need to map the JSON fields to our database table columns, as some JSON field names contain whitespace while the corresponding database column names do not. I'll just quickly run through the column mapping, as it's not particularly exciting to watch. I simply map the field names in the JSON to the column names in the database table and specify the data types at the end. Because the data I need is inside the finance array in the JSON document, not at the root level, I have to specify the path when configuring the Get JSON Data Reader action. Otherwise, it won't find the data and will return an empty result. The final step of the flow is to add an action to save the data to the SQL database. I'll use the Insert Rows action for SQL Server and pick an existing connection. If I didn't have one, I could just create it from the same screen and provide the connection details as shown here. Now I'll simply select the source, which is my JSON reader, and the destination table, and then we'll click on the Run button to execute the import. With the flow completed successfully, let's switch to the Power BI report and refresh to see the result. Our report shows the data we got from the portfolio's API, so things look good. Switching back to the flow, there are a few things worth noting. In a real application, you'd typically add a few more SQL actions to handle incremental or differential updates and avoid duplicate data. If you prefer using a lakehouse instead of a SQL database for storage, that's just as easy to set up. I'll quickly walk through the steps to show how it's done, but I won't run it since the Power BI model isn't connected to a lakehouse. I'll simply remove the SQL action for saving data to the database and replace it with an action to create a Parquet file instead. Then I'll add actions to upload the file to a Fabric lakehouse and load the lakehouse table that, in a real-world scenario, a Power BI report would be connected to. I don't have a suitable table in my lakehouse for this demo. The file would be called portfolios.parquet, as defined in the upload step. But this shows the main steps for using a lakehouse instead of a SQL database. Now, let's drop the temporary lakehouse changes and add a trigger so the integration can run without manual intervention. To do this, we'll simply add a schedule trigger and configure it to run every 2 hours every day. And that concludes this demo. Thanks for watching.